I want to first start on a new scene with Control N. That will clear out all of my Octane settings so they do not stack, so we do not get any leftovers before we start opening a new one. This scene now has already been previously converted to Octane, so now we can see it here. It's loading materials that have already been pre-set up, which usually takes a minute before it settles down. In a scene like this, you can tell like we have a lot more surfaces than we did when we just had a Victoria. But as I mentioned before, if needed, we can also filter out these objects and select the surfaces that we need, or we can use the surface picker here and just adjust the surfaces that we feel need most adjustment. Let's check how this scene looks in the viewport right now. This is our emissive fog setting that is already selected here. I just want to show a little bit more of it. As I said earlier, it's mainly better visible when we have some depth to the scene, like if we are rendering cities or some environment. What is here left to see and understand is the medium that is activated in these environments, in these particular two environments. I have chosen the scattering medium on a very, very low density, with a volume step length of 100 and volume shadow ray step length of 100 as well. These settings are telling our emissive fog here how dense it's gonna be, and we're telling it how much light and how much shadow it's going to pass through. These two particular settings, like absorption and scatter, as well as the emission in this case, are determining how our fog is going to look. Emission here means that all of this volume over here, which is a generic volume, Daz currently does not support the actual volume objects, but we can still use the scatter as a medium in the environment tab, similar to matte fog in Iray. And we here can change. We could even maybe add some color to it, but this is emissive and it's going to affect your light. So it's pretty much better to use in scenes without much added light and then adjust the density and adjust the power here. It's currently set to only 0.05 watts. If we set it to even less, we will see how our scene gets darker, because that fog was also sort of an illumination to this scene. In the same manner, if we go to the dust, which here is different in a way that it does not emit light, so it's basically blocking the actual daylight that we have preset it here. This daylight is actually pretty strong, but we have a sort of a dense dust going on. Another way to use the dust is if you are interested in achieving something like God rays, like I had in this render in particular. Here I had a scene that is closed up on all the sides except for the roof here, so I had a very, very high intensity on the environment and the dust filling out the scene behind my model. So when this very strong light was coming through these open holes, it basically created these God rays. So these aren't added, this image is straight from the Octane render, and it is achieved by using this medium in a closed environment with very, very centered source of light. So in return we got some God rays as the effect. Same as with the emissive fog, we are going to control the density if we want less of this dust or if we want more of it. The scene gets darker as it's blocking the light. We could use more volume and it's going to let more light through, but not as much volume here as we did in the previous one, you're basically going to play this a little bit by the feel, how your scene is set up, how much light you're having in it. Is it a closed scene? Is it an open scene? So you can play with these settings a bit. Again, if you go too far away from the settings, you can always reload them back from the lights preset and load them again into your scene without losing your progress. So now that we went through all of these environments and render settings that are included in the Octane Render Kit, I hope this was informative, that it gave you all the information you need to start experimenting and rendering on your own. I'm also, for the end of this video, going to start one scene that I've already previously rendered in Iray, and I have never rendered it in Octane so far, so I'm going to work a little bit faster and convert the entire scene from Iray to Octane to get almost the same or similar result, and in return getting probably a faster render on my card, because on my 1070 Ti, Octane still does run faster than the Iray does. So before we go forward to converting that whole scene from Iray to Octane, I just want to go through shaders one more time just to see them up close, and I want to show you the quickest way to create your own shaders using the node graph editor inside Octane Render plugin. Now I have loaded my stem for dragon. I'm going to load all auto materials as I don't have any right now. I'm going to click on this plane. I'm going to create a new blank material, and I'm going to turn it into a shadow catcher. Shadow catcher is basically a diffuse material that has a shadow catcher function on. What this does, now if we open our scene here, now we don't get, actually we don't see much because we don't have many textures, but there is a plane that is only catching the shadow down there. I'm going to add some lights for starters. I'm going to add my high settings, which are turning things to the path tracing right away. And I'm going to use one of these HDRIs. If at any point you see the null delete thing, you feel free to just delete it. Those are some leftovers that I couldn't remove from the presets, but I tried to keep them at the bare minimum so there isn't a lot of those. So we have our high settings here. I'm just going to make it a square. So now by opening our viewport, I'm selecting my dragon surface. I'm going to go to my shader presets. Oops. And let's first see some of these shaders and what they look in action. They're loading pretty fast. These are the car paints coated blue. Another car paint coated purple. You can further inspect these and differences between these so you can change colors to get more options. Another option I thought would be interesting is a car paint with flakes, which is kind of a competition online to achieve this effect. We already have it in Iray, but I actually custom created it in Octane by using some interesting mix of the universal material and metallic material, metallic for the flakes and universal for the diffuse. And for the mix channel, I used the noise procedural shader included in the Octane Render plugin. There are a few of these. There is the noise one, and if you open this bar over here in the NGE, you will see more of these procedurals like check mix, saw wave, triangle wave, sine wave, marble, turbulence that I used for water. Rigid fractal, noise, and polygon side. You can use these procedurals in your own shaders and surfaces. For an example, what I very much like to use is noise and turbulence, especially if the surface doesn't have bumps. So I like to add a little bit of this to add a little bit more detail to it. What's Also interesting about these, you can set them on a custom way how they are going to show up in the render. They do not necessarily have to project on the mesh UV. You can use this XYZ to UVW projection, which in particular I did use for these flakes, because when spread around the mesh UV, they would give uneven results. So to ensure that they always look the same on any object they're applied, they are using this projection XYZ to UVW in the coordinate space for object space. I've included red metallic flakes as well, which have the golden metallic overlay with the completely same method. Next we have some more interesting mixes and some more interesting effects like anodized. I tried to just include as many different ways to use shaders and present them. So you can open these if you are eager to learn, if you are eager to explore. They will give you a little bit of information how you would go about making your own effects, how you would go about mixing your own shaders and similar. For an example, also this Sunburst Shader is interesting because just like just a second, here we are. Just like we used the noise, here we are using the fall off texture, which is making these two colors, which are set here in the RGB node, like red and the yellow, it's making them blend like this, giving this pretty effect of a sunburst. This was made with the universal material. I'm going to mention it in the end once more. Universal material type is somewhere the most similar to our Iray Uber shader because it was created relatively recently for the Octane render, and it's created with Substance artists in mind, so they could plug in all of their maps exported from Substance Painter and Substance Designer. So this one universal, well, it is the universal type. You can achieve many different effects with it. You can use it for glossy shader, for the diffuse shader, you can make a glass out of it. You can use it for the subsurface shaders like the wax or the skin even. Skin results though opinions have been mixed online, but you can attempt it like you would just plug in the medium. We have also the new scatter medium, that is, I actually used that one, random walk medium. You no longer have to set settings for the scatter and for the absorption. Here we go. For an example, if we use the universal material here with the transmission without the albedo is basically your diffuse. But here we have the transmission and we have the random walk plugged into the medium here, which gives it sort of this SSS look. Looks a little bit like soap. Actually, it's soft plastic, so it should look like soap. Also, more interesting things that you can, for an example, here I have added, this was one of the last shaders I added because first I only added the emissive one. This is what you would get. For an example, if you would go here and create this new light source, this would be a simple conversion. But this other one that is glowing red would be the textured conversion. So I added both just in case so you can see the differences between them. Then we have some very interesting effects like this dirt and patina and rust. They are also shaders that are mixed using the amount as dirt texture. You can use these on basically some statues, maybe like this. Keep in mind that it can get sensitive about the quality of the mesh. So if you have too many triangles or your mesh is low poly, it's going to show some artifacts. But On a higher poly models, it's going to give you this fall-off effect, this mixed layer effect that I thought would be interesting to include in our little Octane Render Kit. We also have these liquids. We have the orange juice. We have the milk. These may take a second longer to render than the regular shaders because they are using subsurface scattering. We also have, of course, the most popular metals. I included the copper, the gold, the silver. You can play with these and make more interesting colors. Rubbers are also a little bit on the medium side, so they are using the subsurface. Then we have the silk, to which I have added a little bit of details as well. For an example here, I use the noise for the bump so that it's not like completely smooth, because no silk fabric is ever completely smooth. I use the similar method here for the leather as well. As you can see, it's a little bit bumpy. This generic leather is a little bit rough. Then we have the soft leather that's basically suede. Out of the fabrics, we also have the ever popular velvet and the waters that I've shown in one of the promos. Where I want to mention more about these water shaders is how I also used turbulence in different ways. For all three of these have different turbulence applied to them. For an example, here we can see, if you click on the turbulence node, you can see all the details about it. We could go, well, let's for a second just select the water that's not going to be so transparent, so you can better see what I'm talking about. Select our dragon, and let's go to the turbulence here. For an example, here the power is 3. If I lower it, you will see how the bumpiness or the turbulence is going down. We also can adjust the octaves and the omega, which basically dictate how much detail is going to be in this turbulence procedural texture. You can also, I also want to mention how to do the tiling in Octane. For an example, if you are using a texture shader that uses like 2 tiles in your diffuse slot, here you can set all of that. Like if we would go to 2D transform, this is like your texture would be 2D, so we would go to 2D transform and we would use the scale. Scale of 1 is the tiling of 1 by 1. And unlike how we use in Daz Studio and Iray, we would go up 2 or 3 or 5 or 10 to make it scale more times. In Octane, that's going into reverse. So for an example, if we want to scale it twice, we would go and click 0.5 on the X and the Y. If we would want to go more and like say 10 times, then it would be 0.1. If we would use, see how I'm getting here more detail, even if that's not so much what I intended, but now it's tiling actually my turbulence map here, making it smaller and smaller. If we would go higher to say 2 or 3, see how now it's stretching it in a very nice way. You can use these effects for different things. That's mostly why I wanted to give some attention to the turbulence, to procedural shaders in particular, because they can be very useful. Another thing, like if we are using different nodes, we can make bump completely independent from, let's say, diffuse map. We can tile the bump 10 times and we can tile the diffuse 1 time independently. So that's one of the benefits of Octane. And again, I urge you to look for a little bit of a tutorial about NGE if you are scared of this. There is literally nothing to be scared of. NGE is just a powerful tool. It gives you so much freedom. It gives you much more clarity than if you would go here. I've seen people taking screenshots like, this is my shader, and that's all nice and well, but it looks very messy looked from here. Like when you open it in a node graph editor, you just get this this very clear node. You can zoom in, you can see exactly what's what. You can pull out the things that you need. For an example, if you want to add a map into the albedo channel, you can also go and pull RGB image and just connect it here. And here you can set all of the settings that you would need. You can also how to make templates. For an example, if we want a templated image here in the albedo channel, we would just click here, and primary source, you can select, let's say, diffuse, right? Because this is a diffuse channel albedo. You can even select keep previous if no new map was found, or you can select static, don't replace by loaded content, and make this diffuse map that you would choose to be permanent after loading a shader. I mean permanent as long as permanent as far as the map is concerned. When you switch the shader, of course, you're going to lose all of those settings again. Speaking of losing the settings, once you apply a new shader to the surface, the previous shader that you had is going to be saved here in unused. You can occasionally clear this list by delete unlinked materials, or you can go and reuse them from there. Like if you made a mistake, you didn't want to replace something, you can always find it there. And also, since I activated the template, these little surfaces that have this little T, green T on the left, that means that they are templated. That's how I made all of these templated shaders. Okay, so now that we've seen this and went through that, let's just, another thing, create this new material, blank material. For an example, how would you go about making your own shader? You would start here. It would load as glossy by default. Here you can go and you can change it into, let's say, the universal. And now you can find what you need here. Like you have RGB image, gray image is usually used for bumps, for speculars and such. You can use the RGB image, which would be for your diffuse. You can also find the colors. You can find all of the interesting like shaders, like dirt texture, fall of texture that I've used in some of these examples. You can use mediums, absorption, scatter, and random walk. Or you can just plug in the plain RGB color. Sure, you could go here too, and you could just change the color here, but it is a lot more organized if you do it this way. So I suggest plugging in these different channels. We can also then go and, let's say, let's say we want to plug in the same color for the sheen or for the transmission or any other channel for that matter. We can use one color or one slot for several different channels. Okay, so that would be it considering the shader. So now we are going to go on to our scene and convert one entire scene that was originally made for Iray and to make it look the similar or maybe even the same in Octane. Thank you for watching.